There's a game called K2. In K2, you are mountaineers scaling K2, one of the tallest, deadliest mountains in the world. Each of you is going to have two climbers. One of them is going to have a smooth edge. One of them is going to have a sort of jagged edge. Functionally, they're both the same, but I sort of think of it as this is kind of like the city dweller climber who's become softened over the years from a sedentary lifestyle. This is sort of the jagged, rugged mountain climber who's been doing this for years. But again, functionally, they're the same. What's going to be happening in this game is you're moving these guys up the mountain. You're getting points the higher you get. But if at any point those climbers die, you're going to lose all those points. So the game, I think, pretty accurately depicts what it's like to climb a mountain, except for the fact that you want anybody else climbing the mountain to die. Because if they die, their achievements get wiped from the record books, and you can set the record for highest climb. So like I said, you've got your two climbers. You've got essentially a score track on the right. So you're going to put figures representing both of those climbers on the score track on the right. And then you've got a board which shows the acclimatization level of both of those climbers. So basically, the higher this gets, the better off they're doing. Because if this ever goes below 0, those climbers are going to die. So those are both going to start off at 1, but these are going to track what your acclimatization score is as the game goes along. The other thing we're going to have set up at the beginning of the game, this is essentially a calendar. So each round is going to be a day. We're going to start with this black token right here on day 1. Then we go to day 2, day 3. Whenever we go to day 4, we're going to get rid of those first 3 days, move this card over, and now we can still see the next few days coming up. So there's 18 days total to this game. You need to keep your mountaineers alive across those 18 days. So that's really what you're trying to do. Let's put this here for the sake of getting started. You also notice that the game has sort of easier and harder modes you can do in a number of different ways. This is the easier side of the board. You can flip it over. There's a harder side of the board. These day trackers, we're going to do summer mode, which is represented by the sun. But there are also day trackers, which are represented with snowflakes. Those are winter. There's a couple extra cards you can use, which kind of give you extra lives. We're going to leave those out. There's one other adjustment we'll get to, but there are different ways you can make the game easier or harder, depending on how hard you want it to be. So we're going to do the easy board. We're going to do it in summer, but we're going to do it without those extra lives for this demonstration. Each turn, there's going to be 5 things that happen, and it's spelled out in the rule book under the section called Sequence of Play. So the first thing that's going to happen is card selection. So each of you is going to have a deck of cards, which has your color right there on the back of the card. You're going to start off with a hand of 6 cards, and you're going to choose 3 of them to play face down. These green cards, these are movement cards. These are going to determine your ability to move up and down the mountain. The blue cards are acclimatization cards. These are going to affect your acclimatization score. And then these ones with 2 numbers on them, those are rope cards. They have 2 separate movement numbers on them. You either choose on your turn to move up or to move down with the rope card. And if you move up, this would move you up 1 space. If you move down, it would move you down 3 spaces. So depending on which direction you're going in, they're going to be higher or lower movement scores. So you're going to choose 3 cards. You're going to play them face down. I'm not going to worry about the rest of your hand for now. Everyone's going to do that at the same time. And then we're going to go on to the second step, which is the risk tokens. So we're going to start off with a pile of risk tokens face down. 3 of them are going to be face up. 2s are in red. They actually represent -2. This represents -1. And there's one other, how good am I? There's one other token, which is a 0, and that's going to be worth 0. So basically, the larger the number is, the worse they are. So what we're going to do is everyone's going to reveal the 3 cards that they chose. They're going to put them face up, and we're going to add up everyone's movement score. So we're going to take all the numbers on the green cards they have and add them up. So this person here would have a movement score of 3 plus 1. So if there's ever a rope card, we're going to choose the number on the left to calculate your movement score. So they'd have a movement score of 4. Everyone says what their movement score is. Whoever has the highest movement score has to take one of these risk tokens. Whichever one you take is going to hurt you that turn. You're pretty much always going to want to choose the lowest number. So this player would probably choose the 1. And then you're going to flip up another risk token and add that to the collection. So now the next player is forced to take a risk token. There's only 2s out there. They're going to be stuck taking a 2. Probably as the game goes along, you're going to have more and more of the high numbers being left behind. And so it's going to be more and more likely you're going to get stuck with a more painful risk token. Excuse me. So you're going to take your risk token. If there's ever two players who are tied for the highest movement score, nobody takes a risk token that round. Next turn is going to be the action phase. So somebody is going to have this ice pick in front of them. They're going to be the start player. I'm sure I'm using incorrect mountain terms or mountain climbing terms. I apologize. I know nothing about climbing. I am the soft city guy I mentioned earlier. But somebody's going to have this in front of them. They're the start player. So let's say it was this player. They would go first, and then clockwise, everyone would go around, and they would take their turn for the action phase. At the end of the turn, this is going to rotate to the next player in the order clockwise. They're going to be the start player for the next round. So whoever goes first is going to play their 3 cards. This basically means I have a movement score of 4 if I'm going up, or 6 if I'm going down, and I've got an acclimatization number of 3. I can split those up however I want amongst my climbers. So, for the sake of making this a bit clearer, let's actually say this was my hand. So I had a movement score of 5 and a acclimatization score of 3. I can split up these numbers however they want. Even though I've got a 2 and a 3, I could give 4 movement units to one climber and 1 to the other. I can give all 5 to one guy. I can split them up however I want. Same with the acclimatization. I can give 1 to one and 2 to the other climber. So for movements, whatever that number is, that's how many spaces I can move. Each time I move into a new space, that takes 1 movement unit up, unless I'm moving into a space with a number in a yellow circle on it. Those are tougher terrain. It's harder to move into those spots. So this would take 2 movement units to move into this spot. Whether I'm going up or down, even if I'm using the rope going down, this still is going to take 2 movement units to move up into, or to move into. As you can tell, the higher you get up the mountain, the more tough terrain spots there are. And all the way near the top, it actually can take even 3 movement units to move into a given space. The other thing I can do with my movement units is I can pitch a tent. So if I'm ever in a spot, I can use one of those units, and instead of moving, I can pitch a tent. Both climbers have 1 tent they can pitch in the game. That's it. Wherever they put it, it's there for the rest of the game. So if the smooth climber pitches a tent, we're going to use the smooth tent, put it there. If the rugged climber pitches a tent, we're going to put it there. If I'm ever in a spot where that number in that yellow circle is a 2, that means it's going to take 2 movement units to pitch that tent. If you're using a rope card's movement units to pitch that tent, you can only use the upward side's number. You can't use the downward number for pitching a tent. So you can move as much as you want with the movement guys, and then you're going to apply your acclimatization number. So like I said, this is a tracking what your acclimatization score is. I can move these guys up a total of 3 spots with this card. The reason these numbers matter is if you ever go below 1, you die, which obviously you don't want to do. We're going to rotate around. Everyone's going to move. I'll point out 2 other things about moving. Number 1, there's a number of climbers on the side of the board here. You'll notice the board is broken into different elevations. So this line here means everything here is above 6,000 meters. Everything above this line is above 7,000 meters, etc. Each sort of tier of elevation has a different maximum number of climbers that can be in a spot on that tier. So if I have a purple climber here, and then a second tier climber goes in there, if this is a 3-player game, what this means is that within this elevation, the most climbers you can have in a given spot is 2. If it was a 4-player game, the most climbers you could have in that spot is 3. If red's moving up the board, he can move through this space, but he can't stop on this space because it's already at the maximum number of climbers for that spot. The extra element in which you can make the game a bit more difficult that I mentioned earlier is that there are a couple of red climbers on the board. Basically, if you want to do it in hard mode, we don't count the red climber. If you want to do it in easy mode, you do. So what I mean by that is if you're at this elevation and it's a 5-player game and you're playing in hard mode, no other player can come onto the spot. If you're doing it in sort of the easier mode, then you could have a second climber in that spot for a 5-player game. So that red climber, you choose at the beginning of the game whether or not you want to count it. The other thing that's going to happen with movement is the higher you get, the more points you're going to score. So if I get to this spot, I've got a flag here with a 4 on it. That means I move that same mountaineer up the scoreboard to that spot on the scoreboard. So because this guy got here, I go up to here, which is worth 4 points. If I go up here to 5, he goes up to 5 points. If at some point I go back down to 4, he's still going to stay up here. So this is basically tracking the highest elevation you've reached in your climb. The only way you lose points is if at any point that acclimatization number goes below 0, your guy dies. That means that climber also dies. He's removed from the score track. At the end of the game, that climber is only going to get you 1 point. But if they're at a certain numbered spot on the board, on the scoreboard, at the end of the game and they haven't died, that's how many points they're going to get you. If I get here to the 5-point spot, and later yellow gets to the 5-point spot, they're going to go right behind my guy. So whoever got to that spot first is going to be in the front. If yellow later gets to 6 points, and then purple gets to 6 points, now purple is behind yellow. So whoever's in the front of that number is whoever got there first. All right, that's action. We're going to go up to the acclimatization checks. So there are a couple things that can affect your acclimatization score in a turn. If I'm on a spot at the end of a turn with a blue circle and a number in the middle, I get to add that much to that climber's acclimatization score. So in this case, I get to add 1 to the jagged climber's acclimatization score. As you go up the mountain, you're going to get more spots without that bonus. And at some point, you're going to get really high elevation. There's going to be negative numbers affecting your acclimatization score. So when I'm up here, this is going to make my acclimatization score go down a spot. There's one other thing which can help you is if you finish the turn in a spot which has one of your tents on it, doesn't matter which climber it is, just as long as you're a spot with your color tent on it, you get to add 1 to your acclimatization score because you finished in that spot. If another player finishes in a spot with a tent on it of another team's color, they can't use that tent. So again, there's a cutthroat game. You want the other climbers to die, so they can't take refuge in your tent. So if you finish a turn with a tent in it, in a spot with a tent in it, you add 1 to your acclimatization score. We covered the numbers. There's one other thing which affects your acclimatization score, and that's the weather. Again, each round, we're moving this black marker forward, and that's moving us forward another day on the calendar. Let's say we're on this day on the calendar. If you'll notice, there's a white bar here between 7,000 and going past 8,000. That means the weather is only going to affect people who are at an elevation of 7,000 meters or higher. Let's say he was there. And this is what you're going to do to your acclimatization score. So this guy, because he's in this higher elevation, would have his acclimatization taken down by 1. Everyone who's not in that spot is unaffected by the weather. And you'll see on some spots the weather doesn't actually hurt you at all. On some days, the weather doesn't hurt you at all. So we're going to do our acclimatization checks. The final thing we're going to do when it comes to acclimatization is if you're above 6, you're going to ultimately go back down to 6. So if at the end of your turn you're over 6, you can never get too high of an acclimatization score. And if at any point, like I said, you're below 1, then you die. It's possible one mountaineer could die, the other one's going to keep on climbing, and he'll still be able to win the game for you, but it's going to make it a lot harder. That's the end of the turn. This card is going to go to the left, which means the player clockwise to you is going to now be the start player. Our calendar tracker is going to go up a day, and we're going to repeat that process. During that card selection phase, at some point you're going to get to a point where you've gone through a bunch of cards. You only have 3 cards left. There's no other cards to draw. You have to use those 3 cards for that turn, and then on the next turn you're going to shuffle all your cards. You're going to draw 6 fresh ones. So you've got 18 cards in your deck. You're going to ultimately go through your deck 3 times because there's going to be 18 days total. Whenever we get to the last day, we're going to play through that day, and then the game's going to end. And so it's going to be whoever has the most points at the end of that day is your winner. Now the key thing about that is that means that even if you get to the top, you've gotten your number of points, but we're still going along this tracker for the calendar. So that guy could still die, you could still lose your points. It's not just whoever gets to the top first. So you probably want to start getting down the mountain so that it's not as hard to survive as it would be if you stayed at the top. You want to keep these guys alive to the end of day 18. At the end of day 18, whoever has the most points on this leaderboard is going to be your winner. If two separate players are tied for most points, then it's going to be whoever got to the peak of the mountain first is going to be your winner. If players are still tied, even with that tiebreaker, so basically if nobody got to the top of the mountain and players were tied for most points, then it's just going to end as a tie. I think that's kind of a ridiculous way to end the game. I would say if you have two players who are going up this scoreboard, let's say this guy's got 2 points and 3 points, this guy's got 4 points and 1 point. They're both tied at 5. It seems pretty clear to me that yellow should win because they were further up the mountain than purple ever got at their peak. So that's the way you could decide to do it. But according to the rules, you would be in a tie if you're tied for most points and nobody got to the top of the mountain. That's how you play K2. Have fun.